"I could not let her freeze," he said. The words came out flat, almost embarrassed, like a man confessing to something he did not fully understand himself. That is the whole of it. The ledger lay open on the banker's desk in Prosper, Colorado territory, columns of figures in someone else's careful hand. Hugh Dawson's signature at the bottom of every page, though she understood now that he could barely write it, that he had spent a decade having documents read aloud to him under false pretenses so no one would ever know. 3 months of firewood delivered to her door by men who would not say who sent them. The note on her father's land, paid in full 2 weeks before Winifred Dunwoody could have forced a sale. Every debt Agnes had carried since September, settled by a man who never once asked her to be grateful, who never once let her feel small for needing. Agnes Tremaine was 32 years old. She had spent 3 winters in a rented room above the milliner's shop, never quite paid ahead, always 1 week from ruin. When Winifred Dunwoody claimed her woodlot against her father's old note, she believed the cold would finish what shame had started. She believed she would become what every woman alone and past 30 feared becoming, a burden, then a memory, then nothing at all. She had whispered to him once, standing in the dark beside his woodpile with her arms full of stolen fuel, her face burning with the shame of being caught, "I will put it back by morning." He had said nothing that night, just stepped back into the shadow of his doorway and let her carry the wood home. What kind of man watches a woman steal from him in the dark, says nothing, and then spends 3 months making certain she will never have to steal again? If this story already feels like a place you have been, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight. I want to know. 6 weeks earlier, Agnes Tremaine stood on the courthouse steps in Prosper, Colorado territory, reading the notice for the 3rd time. The ink was fresh, the paper still stiff from the print shop. Her father's name in the 2nd column, under the heading Debts Owed and Claims Filed, and beside it the parcel number for the woodlot he had left her when he died. She was 32 years old. She had nursed that woodlot through 2 bad winters and 1 dry summer, hauling fallen branches herself when she could not afford to hire anyone. The lot was not large, perhaps 3 acres, but it was the only thing standing between her and a cold that killed. Winifred Dunwoody's name appeared in the 3rd column. Claimant. Agnes did not need anyone to explain what that meant. The October wind pulled at her shawl. She held the edges closed with one hand and read the notice again, as though the letters might rearrange themselves into something she could survive. They did not. She had spent 3 winters in a rented room above the milliner's shop, never quite paid ahead. Always 1 week from the conversation she dreaded, the one where Mrs. Pace would look at her with that particular mixture of pity and impatience and say she was very sorry. Truly she was. But the room was needed. The boarding house where Agnes cooked paid her in meals and a small wage. The wage covered rent. The meals kept her alive. The woodlot was supposed to cover everything else. Behind her, someone coughed. She turned. Alma Herrick from the dry goods counter stood 3 feet away, reading the same column Agnes had been reading. Alma's eyes moved to Agnes's face, held there a moment too long, then slid away. "I heard Winifred's been waiting on that note since your father passed," Alma said. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of a woman offering information while pretending not to. "Said he always meant to collect. Just wanted to give you time first." "Time," Agnes repeated. Alma nodded. Pulled her coat tighter, walked back down the steps without looking at her again. That became the pattern over the next several days. People in town knew. Of course they knew. Prosper was not large enough to keep secrets, only to pretend they were being kept. Agnes felt the shift in how women greeted her at the mercantile, how the minister's wife lingered after Sunday service to ask with tremendous care, whether Agnes was managing all right, whether she had thought about what came next. What came next? As though Agnes had any say in what came next. Winifred Dunwoody was not a cruel man in the way that stories require cruelty. He did not raise his voice or make threats. He simply owned things, and when other people could not pay for what they owed him, he collected. He had been doing this for 40 years. He was patient. He was thorough. He had already let it be known, quietly, to every man in the district who sold firewood, that Agnes Tremaine's credit was no good. She learned this when she tried to buy 2 cords from the Hanson brothers. "We cannot," the older one said. He would not meet her eyes. Just cannot. She did not ask why. She already knew. The first frost came on the 2nd week of October. Agnes woke in her rented room to find ice on the inside of the window. She had 3 days of kindling left, maybe 4 if she stretched it. After that, nothing. That was when she noticed Hugh Dawson for the first time. Not noticed him. She had seen him before around town. A quiet man, weathered, a beard going gray at the edges. He owned the ranch north of Prosper, kept to himself, came into town for supplies and church and nothing else. She knew his name the way she knew everyone's name. She did not know anything about him, but she noticed that week that his woodpile was enormous, stacked behind his barn, visible from the road if you walked past at the right angle. Split logs, seasoned, more than any single man could burn in 3 winters. Another small thing she noticed. He walked past the boarding house every morning on his way to the feed store, always at the same hour, always alone. Once, when she was sweeping the front steps, he touched the brim of his hat and said nothing at all. Not a greeting, not an acknowledgement, just that small motion, and then gone. She did not know what to make of it. She did not know yet that she would spend the next month making herself small, stretching her kindling, wearing every piece of clothing she owned to bed, telling herself she could survive on pride alone. She did not know that pride would not be enough. She did not know that one night, when the cold became something she could not argue with, she would stand in the dark beside Hugh Dawson's woodpile with her arms full of stolen fuel, and he would step out of the shadows like he had been waiting for her, and she would whisper the only words she could think of. "I will put it back by morning." He did not say a word that night. That was what she could not stop thinking about. She had stood there with her arms full of his wood, her breath making clouds in the dark, the shame so thick in her throat she could barely swallow, and Hugh Dawson had simply stepped back. Let her pass. Let her carry what she had stolen and walk away with it. The next morning she woke expecting someone at her door, the constable. Winifred Dunwoody with a new claim. Even Hugh himself, come to demand payment or explanation. No one came. She went to work at the boarding house. She cooked breakfast for the regulars and washed the dishes and swept the floor and pretended she was not waiting for something terrible to arrive. By noon, she had almost convinced herself that she had imagined the whole thing, that Hugh had not seen her at all, that she had gotten away with it. Then she came home. There was wood stacked beside her door. Not much. A small pile, maybe a week's worth. The logs split and dry, and arranged with a care that said someone had thought about how she would carry them inside. No note, no name, just the wood, sitting there like it had always been there, like it belonged. She stood looking at it for a long time. The light was going. The cold was coming in. She should have carried it inside immediately. Instead, she stood there, her hands at her sides, her heart doing something she could not name. Another small thing she noticed. The logs were the same size and cut as the ones in Hugh Dawson's pile. That became the pattern over the next several days. She would go to work in the morning. She would come home in the afternoon. There would be wood beside her door. Never too much, never too little. Just enough to keep her 1 week ahead of the cold, Always. She tried once to watch for whoever was delivering it. She asked Mrs. Pace if she had seen anyone. She lingered near her window in the early hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of a wagon or a man with an axe. Nothing. Whoever was doing this knew her schedule, knew when she left, knew when she came back, knew exactly how much she needed, and never gave her more than that, as though excess would have been an insult, as though the gift had to stay small enough that she could pretend it was not charity. She did not know how to feel about that. October gave way to November. The first real snow came on a Tuesday, heavy and wet, the kind that turned the streets to mud and then froze them solid overnight. Agnes added another blanket to her bed and another shawl to her shoulders and still woke some mornings with her fingers too stiff to grip the bread knife. The wood kept coming. Another small thing she noticed. Hugh Dawson had started taking breakfast at the boarding house. Not every day. 2 mornings a week, sometimes 3. He would come in early, before the rush, and sit at the same table by the window. He ordered coffee and whatever she had made that morning. He ate slowly. He said almost nothing. When she came to clear his plate, he would touch the brim of his hat, the same motion she had seen on the steps that first week, and then he would be gone. She did not know what to make of it. She knew he had a ranch to run. She knew he had hands who could cook for him, or could at least manage biscuits and bacon. There was no reason for a man like him to be eating at a boarding house in town, paying good money for a meal he could have made himself, unless the meal was not what he had come for. She pushed the thought away. It was foolish. She was 32 years old. She was not the kind of woman men made excuses to see. She was the kind of woman men tolerated, employed, forgot about. She had made peace with that. But she noticed, each time he came, that his eyes followed her across the room. Not staring, not demanding, just watching. The way a man watches the weather or the way a horse watches a gate, it knows will open eventually. Another small thing she noticed. When she refilled his coffee, their fingers almost touched. Almost. November became December. The cold deepened. The snow came more often. Agnes learned to read the sky like a farmer, to know by the color of the clouds how many hours she had before the next storm. She learned to bank her fire at night so the coals would still be alive in the morning. She learned to sleep in her coat and her boots and pretend it was normal. The wood kept coming. By now she had stopped pretending she did not know who was leaving it. The Hanson brothers would not sell to her. No one else in the district had woodpiles like that. No one else walked past her door at the same hour every day. No one else looked at her the way Hugh Dawson looked at her, like she was something worth looking at, like she had not been diminished by everything that had happened. She did not thank him. She did not know how. What words could she possibly use that would not make both of them uncomfortable, that would not turn the gift into something that required acknowledgement, that required her to admit how badly she had needed it? So she said nothing, and he said nothing, and the wood kept appearing, and the coffee kept getting poured, and their fingers kept almost touching, and the winter kept getting colder. Another small thing she noticed. He always sat at the same table, the one closest to the kitchen door, the one where he could see her working without having to turn his head. That became the pattern over the next several weeks. He would come in. He would sit. She would bring him coffee and food. They would exchange perhaps 5 words between them: the weather, the roads, whether the biscuits had turned out well. Nothing that mattered, nothing that touched the thing neither of them would name. And yet she found herself thinking about him at odd moments, when she was kneading dough, when she was scrubbing pots, when she was lying in bed at night with the blankets pulled up to her chin, listening to the wind, feeling the cold seeping in around the edges of the window. She thought about his hands, large, work-roughened, the knuckles scarred in places, the way a man's hands get scarred when he has spent his life doing things that break skin. She thought about the gray in his beard and the lines around his eyes and the way he carried himself, heavy and certain, like a man who knew exactly what he was and had stopped apologizing for it. She thought about the night by the woodpile, the way he had looked at her in the dark, the way he had said nothing at all. Another small thing she noticed. He never asked her questions. Not about her father, not about Winifred Dunwoody, not about the woodlot or the debt or how she was managing. Other people in town asked, their voices thick with false concern, their eyes hungry for details they could trade later. Hugh Dawson asked nothing. He simply sat at his table and drank his coffee and watched her move through the room like watching her was enough. She did not know what to make of it. She did not know what to make of any of it. December deepened. She heard through Alma Herrick at the dry goods counter that someone had paid a portion of her debt to Winifred Dunwoody. Not all of it, just enough to buy time. Just enough to make the claim on her woodlot more complicated than Winifred had expected. Alma did not say who. Alma said she did not know. Agnes thought about the ledgers at the bank, the ones she had seen clerks carrying in and out, the ones that tracked who owed what to whom, who had paid and who had not. She thought about the fact that she had never seen Hugh Dawson conduct business there, even though a man with a ranch that size must have accounts, must have dealings, must have left some kind of record. She thought about the documents he had signed, the ones she would later learn he could barely read. Another small thing she noticed. When the Christmas service ended and everyone was milling about in the cold, exchanging greetings and promises to visit, Hugh Dawson stood apart, not unfriendly, not unwelcome, just separate, the way a man is separate when he has learned that most conversations require things he cannot give. She watched him from across the churchyard, the way he held his hat in his hands, the way his eyes moved over the crowd without settling on anyone, the way he looked, for just a moment, like a man who was very tired of being alone. She thought about the cholera outbreak, the one she had survived years ago when she was young and did not yet know that some kinds of knowledge mark you forever. She thought about the army doctor she had worked alongside, holding dying men's hands while he mixed medicines he knew would not be enough. She thought about how that winter had taught her to read bodies, to know when fever was breaking and when it was winning, to understand that sometimes the only thing you could do for someone was stay. She had not told anyone in Prosper about that winter. It was not the kind of thing a woman talked about: sickness, death, the things you learned when you were too young to look away. But standing there in the churchyard, watching Hugh Dawson hold his hat in his hands, she wondered if he might understand, if he might be the kind of man who had also learned things too young, if he might be the kind of man who knew what it meant to carry something you could not put down. Their eyes met across the crowd. He touched the brim of his hat. Just that. Nothing more. She nodded back. Another small thing she noticed. Her heart, despite everything she knew about herself and everything she believed about her prospects, was doing something she could not name. January came hard. The whispers started at the mercantile. Agnes heard them the way a woman learns to hear such things, not through direct confrontation, but through the sudden quiet when she entered a room, the way conversations ended mid-sentence and picked up again as something else entirely. She heard Alma Herrick say to someone behind the pickle barrel, "Well, where do you think the wood comes from?" And then nothing more. She heard the minister's wife tell another woman, in a voice meant to carry, that it was a shame when a respectable woman allowed herself to become beholden. Beholden. That was the word they used, as though accepting help was the same as selling something, as though a woman who could not freeze alone with dignity had failed some test the town had set for her. Another small thing she noticed. The boarding house regulars had started looking at her differently. not with hostility, something worse, a kind of knowing, a kind of assumption about what a woman must be doing to earn the sudden appearance of firewood and the sudden disappearance of debt. They looked at her, and they saw a kept woman. They looked at her, and they decided who she was before she had any say in it. That was when Winifred Dunwoody made his next move. She found the notice pinned to her door on a Tuesday morning. New paper, fresh ink, an addendum to her father's original note, claiming the debt had been twice what she remembered, claiming payments she had never missed had in fact been missed, claiming the woodlot was now forfeit entirely, and that her tenancy in the room above the milliner's shop was contingent on full repayment within 30 days. 30 days. In January. When the roads were frozen and the work was scarce, and no one in town would look her in the eye. She took the notice to the courthouse. The clerk read it and shook his head and said he was sorry, but the document appeared to be in order. She asked to see the original note. He said it had been misplaced. He said these things happened. He said she might try speaking with Winifred directly. She did not speak with Winifred directly. She understood now what he was doing. He had never wanted her money. He wanted her land. He wanted the 3 acres her father had left her, and he wanted the room above the milliner's shop, and he wanted her gone from Prosper so completely that no one would remember she had ever been there at all. The forged addendum was just a tool. The whisper campaign was just a tool. The cold itself was a tool, and he was patient enough to let it work. That was when Agnes stopped going to Hugh Dawson's table. She did not do it because she doubted him. She did it because she had finally understood what her presence was costing him. A man could not be seen helping a woman in the way he had been helping her without the town drawing conclusions. A man with a ranch and a reputation could not buy firewood and pay debts for a spinster without people assuming he was buying something else entirely. She had watched his face the last time he came to breakfast, the way his eyes had followed her across the room, the way his hands had tightened on his coffee cup when the man at the next table made a comment she was not meant to hear. Something about lonely winters, something about what a man must want in exchange. Hugh had not responded. He had simply set down his cup and left his payment on the table and walked out without finishing his meal. But she had seen the set of his shoulders, the way the gray in his beard seemed grayer, the way the town was taking something from him too. So she stopped. She sent one of the other women to refill his coffee. She stayed in the kitchen when he was there. She made herself small and invisible and hoped he would understand that she was trying to protect him, even if she could not say so. Another small thing she noticed. He kept coming anyway, 2 mornings a week, sometimes 3, always the same table, always watching the kitchen door like he was waiting for her to walk through it. And she would stand on the other side, her hands covered in flour, her heart doing that thing she could not name, and she would not walk through. The distance between them grew. January became February. The forged addendum worked its way through the courthouse. Winifred Dunwoody was seen at the bank, conferring with clerks, signing papers. The whispers grew louder. The looks grew harder. Mrs. Pace knocked on Agnes's door one evening and said with tremendous care that she was very sorry, truly she was, but the room would be needed by month's end. Agnes did not argue. She did not plead. She simply nodded and thanked Mrs. Pace for the time she had been given and began to fold her few possessions into the trunk her mother had left her. She was 32 years old. She had survived cholera. She had survived her father's death. She had survived 3 winters in a rented room above the milliner's shop, never quite paid ahead. She did not know if she could survive this. The wood had stopped appearing at her door. She did not know if Hugh had finally given up or if she had pushed him away so effectively that he believed she did not want it. She did not know which possibility hurt more. She only knew that she was about to lose everything: the room, the woodlot, the man who had never asked her for anything in return. And the cold was still coming. New names, established facts. The storm came on the last Thursday of February. Agnes saw it building in the west all morning, the sky going that particular shade of gray that meant the cold would be different this time, deeper, the kind that found the gaps in walls and the spaces between blankets and the places in a body where warmth went to hide. She was walking back from the boarding house when the wind changed. One moment she could see the road ahead. The next, nothing. Just white, just cold, just the sound of her own breathing and the knowledge that she was still half a mile from town. She did not know how long she walked. The snow came sideways, then up, then from directions that should not have existed. She lost the road. She lost the fence line. She lost everything except the cold and the growing certainty that she was going to die out here, alone, and no one would find her until spring. Then a light. She walked toward it. She did not think about where it might lead. She only knew it was light, and she was freezing, and if she stopped moving, she would never start again. The light became a doorway. The doorway became a barn. The barn became Hugh Dawson, standing in the entrance with a lantern in one hand and his other hand reaching for her. He did not ask what she was doing out in the storm. He did not ask why she had been avoiding him for weeks. He simply pulled her inside and shut the door against the wind and said, in a voice that left no room for argument, "There is a stove in the tack room." She could not feel her hands. She could not feel her feet. She followed him through the barn, past horses shifting in their stalls, past the smell of hay and leather and something warm she could not name. The tack room was small. The stove was already burning. He had blankets stacked on a bench, more blankets than a man living alone could possibly need, and she understood all at once that he had been waiting. Not for her specifically, just waiting, in case. "Sit," he said, and she sat. He wrapped one blanket around her shoulders, then another, then a third. His hands moved with the same care she had seen in the way he stacked wood, the same attention to what fit where and how much was enough. He did not touch her skin. He did not need to. The blankets were enough. The stove was enough. The fact that he had been ready for someone, even if not specifically for her, said more than any words could have. They sat in silence for a long time. The stove crackled. The wind screamed against the walls. Agnes felt the feeling return to her fingers first, then her toes, then the rest of her, piece by piece, like someone reassembling something that had been taken apart. Hugh sat across from her on an overturned crate. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was enough. The stove was enough. The storm raging outside, making the world small and close and impossible to escape, was enough. "I stopped coming to your table," she said finally. Her voice sounded strange in the small room, thin, unused. "I noticed," he said. "I thought it would protect you." The whispers, what people were saying. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been whispered about before." She looked at him. The firelight caught the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the way his hands rested on his knees, like they had finally found a place to be still. "Why?" she said. "Why any of it? The wood. The debts. Everything." He did not answer right away. She watched him think about it, watched him turn the question over the way a man turns over a stone to see what lives beneath. "I could not let you freeze," he said. The words came out flat, almost embarrassed, like a man confessing to something he did not fully understand himself. That is the whole of it. The storm lasted 2 days. On the second morning, when the wind had finally died and the snow lay in drifts taller than a man, someone came pounding on the barn door. One of the Hanson brothers, the younger one, his face red with cold and fear. "Alma Herrick," he said. She collapsed at the dry goods. Fever. Bad. Doc Parson is 2 days out at the Mercer place and nobody knows what to do. Agnes was on her feet before she knew she was moving. The walk to town took an hour through snow that came up past her knees. Hugh walked ahead of her, breaking a path, not asking why she was coming or what she thought she could do. The Hanson boy followed behind, his breath ragged with panic. Alma lay on a cot in the back room of the mercantile. Her skin was gray, her breathing shallow. The women gathered around her had the look of people watching someone die and not knowing how to stop it. Agnes pushed through them. She did not ask permission. She did not explain. She simply knelt beside the cot and put her hand on Alma's forehead and felt the fever burning. The fever broke at dawn. Agnes sat back on her heels, her hands still shaking, and watched Alma Herrick take her first real breath in 14 hours. The women gathered behind her had stopped whispering. They had stopped looking at her like a woman who had overstayed her welcome. They were looking at her now like something else entirely. Spring came slowly to Prosper that year. The snow melted in patches. The mud sucked at boots for weeks. Agnes moved through town the way she always had, cooking at the boarding house, walking past the mercantile, nodding at women who now nodded back. The difference was in the small things. Mrs. Pace told her the room above the milliner's shop was hers, as long as she wanted it. Winifred Dunwoody's forged addendum disappeared from the courthouse records, withdrawn without explanation, his standing in town damaged in ways that would never fully repair. The Hanson brothers delivered 2 cords of firewood to her door and would not take payment. But the difference she thought about most was Hugh Dawson. He still came to the boarding house 2 mornings a week, sometimes 3. He still sat at the same table by the window, closest to the kitchen door. But now, when she brought his coffee, she did not send someone else. She brought it herself, and when their fingers touched around the cup, neither of them pulled away. One morning in April, when the first green was showing on the hills, he set something on the table beside his plate. A folded paper, a deed. "The woodlot," he said, "your father's. I bought it from Winifred last month. Figured you should have it back." She looked at the paper. She looked at him. She thought about the night by the woodpile, the shame in her throat, the words she had whispered in the dark. "I will put it back by morning." She had meant the firewood. He had given her something else entirely. She reached across the table, not for the deed, for his hand. She took it, and she held it, and she did not let go. "I could not let you freeze," he had said once, like a man confessing to something he did not understand. She understood now. She understood completely. "When I think about them, I think about that. The way some people spend their whole lives trying to deserve kindness, and the way other people simply offer it, without conditions, without asking for anything in return. The way a hand finally taken says more than any words ever could." If this story stayed with you, tell me where you are listening from tonight and what moment touched you most. If you would like more quiet evenings by the fire, lonely roads, quiet cowboys, and hearts finding their way home, come back for the next one. I will be here.